Good day. Today we're going to be introducing 3D modeling software, and that's called Rhino. Rhino 3D is one of the variety of softwares that offer us multiple ways of modeling an object, regardless what size of object that is, into a computer-generated model or a digital model. It also allows us to add details to the model. It allows us to change the view of the model, and so on. Now, it's important to note that this is not the only software available in the market for 3D modeling. For instance, we have 3D Max, we have, or 3ds Max, which is 3D Studio Max. We also have Maya. We have a long list of 3D modeling software. Each software has its own pros and cons, obviously, and its own uses. For this course, we're going to be looking at Rhino 3D. Now, one of the things that I personally like about Rhino is that it's very flexible and relatively easy to learn. And even though it's a very big software, it offers us a really nice level of user interface and friendliness to new users. So we're going to begin by introducing Rhino in these tutorials, in the next series of tutorials, actually. And we're just going to cover the basics of Rhino. However, a little disclaimer, I'm going to be using Windows interface, and there seems to be a big difference between the Windows and the Mac interface. So all the commands are there for both interfaces, as far as I know, but you will have to do a little bit more research if you're using a Mac interface than and not the same interface as mine. So right now, what you see in front of you is a screenshot of the welcome screen of Rhino, simply because it seems to be quickly disappearing if you do not make a choice. And I needed to explain a few things before we make our choices and before we start working with our documents. What we need to understand is that Rhino 3D first works with a series of things, or a series of units, or a series of interfaces or preferences that we need to assign before it can open a document. Now, to the user or to the person who's viewing the model, the difference might be negligible, but for users who are actually modeling and working with the document, it might make a huge difference. Now, before we start defining the template that we need to use for Rhino, I would like to introduce first how the icon of Rhino looks. I hope this is clear. I hope I can get it clear enough to you. This is how the logo of Rhino that you can see on the upper left corner. Rhino logo looks like this. So you're going to have to look at Rhino. Right now I'm using Rhino 6. It's okay if you're using Rhino 7 or an older version. There seems to be very little differences between the latest versions at the level that we're talking about. We're not going to go so deep into commands and options, and therefore at this level, it's okay if you're using Rhino 6 or 7. So once you locate this icon or this logo in your computer, you can launch the software, and you should end up with a welcome screen that looks like this, that quickly disappears. Now, the reason why, and this is the reason why I had to have a screenshot. Now, we need to understand that Rhino works with 3 different preferences. Those are size, which is the size of your object, how big your object is. So are we modeling a vase, for instance, or are we modeling a building or maybe a city? And this has to do with what kind of objects we're modeling. The next thing is the units. So what units are we using? As we obviously see in the templates, we have centimeters, we have inches, we have meters, centimeters, and so on. For us, as interior designers in our region, we're going to be using millimeters, because simply we're going to be modeling relatively small objects. So obviously we're going to go for millimeters. It's either small objects in millimeters or large objects in millimeters. Now, to define the large or small objects templates, we're going to have to look at what we call as tolerance. Now, tolerance is the level of accuracy. So more decimals. So how many decimals are we going to be using? Are we going to be using 0.1 millimeters, or are we going to go as far as 0.001 millimeters? Now, obviously, we always like to go with higher accuracy. However, there is a downside to that is higher accuracy means a longer time of processing, which also means a larger file. So it can give us a lot of troubles if we use the wrong template, or if we have a large object template, but we require high level of accuracy, that will give us, this discrepancy is going to cause a lot of problems while we are modeling. Similarly, if we use large objects, or we use to model large objects on a small objects template, it's going to have too many decimals, and therefore it's going to take too long to process, and sometimes the document can freeze or start crashing a lot. And therefore we need to really make sure that we define what kind of object we're working with and what level of accuracy we need early on before we begin working on the document. Now we're going to begin our tutorials with a sample project that includes chairs and chair modeling, and therefore we're going to choose small objects because chairs are relatively small objects, and we're going to be using millimeters. So the template we're going to be using is small objects millimeters. So this is where you're going to have to click, and then once you click that, Rhino will automatically open the template. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now because I already have my Rhino application open, and I have chosen the template I want. Now, right now, Rhino has automatically, I was late in choosing my template. Let me just go back to the standards. And I need to double check the level of unit, or what units and the level of accuracy I have. So to do that, if I already have the document open and I need to double check the levels of accuracy and the units that the document has set to, I'm going to have to go to the tools menu right on top right here. And then I'm going to go to options. The options menu should open. And once I go to my units tab right here that I can see under document properties, I can see that my model units are millimeters, and that the tolerance is 0.001, which is a relatively high tolerance, which means this is a template for small objects. Now, of course, I can always change that. So if I choose 0.1, for instance, that means I'm choosing low tolerances. And if I choose 0.001, that means I'm choosing high tolerances to my objects. Of course, I can always change the units. I can always change the tolerances at any point in the document. However, it's important to note that once, if I have a few objects drawn and then I decide to change the tolerance is only the new tolerance is only going to be applied on the future objects. So you will have a really mixed up document, which will cause us a lot of trouble. So it's always recommended to choose your tolerances early on and choose carefully and wisely, so that you don't end up with issues and problems while you are modeling your project later on. Right now, I'm going to accept the units that I have, and I'm going to click on OK. Now, before we start modeling and we start drawing, I'm just going to introduce what we see in front of us in the screen. As I said, I'm using Rhino 6, which is not the latest version right now. In 2022, we have Rhino 7 introduced. However, I decided to go for Rhino 6 just in case. And obviously, I only have the license for Rhino 6. Below the version that we're using, you can see a set of menus, such as the file menu, edit menu, view menu, which is the normal standard menus that we find in any software that we're used to on Windows. Following that, we have curve, surface, and solid. Those are the main menus that we're going to be using while we're working with Rhino. And this is where we will find the majority of our commands. Now, of course, the rest of the menus have their own uses, as we've learned before. We've used the tools menu to check our units and tolerances, for instance. Of course, if I need help, I will always refer to the help menu, either go through the help topics or start looking for whatever help I need, whatever kind of help I need to work with Rhino. If we go slightly downwards towards what we call as the command line, now similar to AutoCAD, Rhino works with command lines. If right now I have a history of the latest 3 commands that were introduced into my document. Now, obviously, I've just opened the document and therefore my commands are limited. Below that, I have this little line that has command, and it's waiting for me to enter the command. And this is where I can start typing. If I choose to go with my keyboard typing method, I can go ahead and start typing my commands, and they will appear right here. Once I hit the enter button, the command will start appearing in the history. of commands that I find. Now, if I wanted to have more or a larger history of commands introduced into my view, I can always press at this line and drag it downwards with my mouse, and the bigger space the command line has, the more history or the larger number of command histories that will be displayed over there. Now, normally we don't refer to more than three commands. So I always like to have a minimal size of command history introduced into my view so that I can have the majority of my view to my modeling surface. Now, below the command line, we'll find a set of tabs or what is actually called the command, toolbar, which is the toolbar groups. Right here are the toolbars. You can see there's standards. Whenever I change my toolbars, you can see that the set of commands at the bottom also change with it. So under standards, I have new, which is also another way of starting a new document. I can press on open and so on. As we said, those are the most commonly used commands under the standard tab or the standard command or toolbar. I can also find different toolbars and different commands under different toolbars. Now, those are editable, so you can edit them, but I highly recommend that you keep that editing to later on once you master Rhino and you know what kind of commands you want to have right in front of you and easy to access. Following that, we're going to look at the main toolbar, which is the toolbar on the left-hand side. Right here is where the most accessible. So I don't need to go to my tabs every time I wanted to draw a line or draw or activate a command that I very frequently use. Instead, I can have them all listed right here, and I can just simply click on it regardless on what tab that command was placed. Now, I find this really helpful and useful. But I highly recommend, again, that you avoid editing that and keep the editing of these commands until you actually master Rhino and you start realizing what kind of commands you need to have in front of you and what kind of commands you need to change or you would rather have in that toolbar that is more accessible. Now, on the right-hand side of your view, you can see the panels right here. Now, there is a chance, chances are, if you've just introduced Rhino, your panels are going to look different than mine. Of course, as we said before, those are editable. You can always change them. You can always add and edit them. The main important or the most important toolbars or panels to have are the layers panels and the properties panels. And we're going to be discussing them as we start working with these two. I always like to have the layers pattern or the layers panel, introduced right here in the bottom, so I can have both properties and layers open at once. Now, at the very bottom of the workspace, you can see that I have a set of information that are given to me on the lower left corner, such as the C-plane, X-axis, Y-axis, Z, and then you can see that I'm using millimeters in my document. So you can see that the units right here are millimeters. And then, of course, I'm using the default layer. And you can have different, as I start moving my cursor, you can look at the bottom at the X and the Y axis and notice that these numbers are changing because I'm simply moving my cursor. So it's the X and Y axis, it's my location or the cursor's location in relation to the X and Y axis. Now, if you look slightly more towards the left side, you can see that I have a set of options, just like with AutoCAD. I can snap to grid. And you notice how if my text is in bold and it's in light blue, the background is in light blue, that means the command is activated. If not, just like right now, this command is not activated because the text is not in bold and the background is gray. I can also turn my ortho mode on, and as we mentioned earlier, ortho means I am using or I'm restricting the movement of my lines to be parallel to the X and Y axis. If it's turned on, I can always turn it off, and so I can have more access or more variety of angles to draw my objects. Following that, I'm going to skip the planner and I'm going to go to OSnap, which is the snap to object, which is what I'm going to be using. And because this is turned on, you can see that these commands or these options at the top are also turned on. And those are the OSnap objects. So I can snap to end, I can snap to near, and you are free to edit that at any point during your modeling process. If I turn that off, then you can see that these options are also turned off because it's useless to change them when the OSNAP is anyway turned off. There's also the gumball. The gumball is a set of axi that allow me to edit my objects, and we're going to talk about it as we work through our tutorials. Now, finally, I have the workspace right in the middle right here. You can see that it's the same space, only in different, from different viewports. So you can see that if my cursor is at the top view, you can, and I start moving it, you can see it move across all the views simultaneously. So it's moving across the perspective view, which is this one, or the right view, or the front view. So you can see that my cursor is changing according to the view that I'm looking at. Now, if I move my cursor from one scene to the next, it automatically switches the active scene. I don't have to press anything, and I don't have to do anything. And you can see that the perspective is now the active one because it's in blue, and again, it's in bold. However, if I move my cursor towards the top, you can see that the blue background is moved to the top view. Similarly, if I move to front, the front becomes, the front title or the title of this view becomes blue, and so on. So that changes automatically, and I don't have to press on anything. Now, if I wanted to increase, or if I wanted to take the perspective into the whole view, so if it's too small and I needed to enlarge it because I'm working with only perspective, I don't need to keep an eye on the top and front and right views. In that sense, I have to double press or double click using my mouse on the name of the view that I want to enlarge, such as the perspective. So notice how my cursor is on the text. And now if I double click on it, you can see that it took over the entire screen. Now, if I wanted to go back to the 4 views or to the 4 viewports, all I have to do is double click again on the same location, and I am back into my 4 views simultaneously. Now, this is really helpful because sometimes you're working with a 3D element that's a bit complicated and you need to go inside and you needed to enlarge things, and that will help you a lot. Now, if I needed to change anything in regards to the viewport that I'm looking at, all I have to do is press on this arrow right next to the viewport's name, and you can see a drop-down menu appearing. I can either maximize it, again, that's another way of allowing the viewport to take over the screen. I can also change the view from wireframe to rendered to shaded, to ghosted, etc. And that will only appear. The difference here is going to be whenever you start modeling 3D objects, and you can see the difference with the 3 viewports. So we're going to leave this, sorry, the view styles. So we're going to leave this for later on, and we'll see the difference in the future tutorials. Now, of course, you can edit whatever you want in the viewport. You can always bring it back to 4 viewports again and make the same adjustments by pressing on this arrow on any viewport that you want. Now, say I have right now, I have the right viewport active and I wanted to look at the left view instead of the right. All I have to do is press again on this arrow, go to set view, and then choose left right here. So right now you can see that my viewport has changed from right to left. I'm going to end the tutorial right here, and in the next tutorials, we're going to be introducing how we can work with Rhino. So please watch the next tutorials. And of course, if you have any questions, write them down and I'll be happy to answer them.